Hello, this is the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Kuestenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping your future. Today we're going to do something a little bit different about helping you take advantage of the future opportunities. So I'm going to ask you a question. I want to start off with a question to the viewers and the listeners of this. Have you ever wondered what's standing between you and your business or your professional success? And I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. It may be you. In fact, you may be too biased to be a successful property investor, business person or entrepreneur. And before you stop watching this, listening to this and saying, oh, what's Michael on about today? I want you to think about the concept that, well, what I've found over the years dealing with a lot of business people and investors is that many of them are their own worst enemy, not because of the decisions they make or the opportunities they miss out on, but because of the way people think. So, Simon, today I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about a topic I love reading, learning about, and that's cognitive biases.
Yeah, very, very exciting. And it's the whole idea of how do you think and what kind of thinking patterns might actually hold you back. And again, in my main role as analyzing the future, predicting the future, you do need to be aware of your own biases and hopefully occasionally catch yourself while you fall into the pitfall of, well, we'll be discussing which pitfalls we might catch ourselves in.
So, I think it's that most of us think we're rational, but we're not, and especially if it comes to money and emotional things, there's no shortage of cognitive biases out there. Look, maybe we should start off by explaining that cognitive biases are patterns of thinking that don't rely on logic. Cognitive biases may convince us to spend more, save less, feel more confident in our decisions than perhaps we should. And the scary thing is, for the most part, we're powerless against them because these things called cognitive biases allow our mind to get around gaps in our knowledge and memory. Look, we need them to get through life. We take shortcuts, otherwise we'd never get through all the decisions that we've got to make. But they're based on generalizations and assumptions, and I guess not all of them are correct. So what I'd like to do, Simon, is just go through a number of them. Let me share some with you, and I'd love your thoughts on it. And the first one, a big one that we tend to get, is what we call confirmation bias, Simon.
Stock standard bias. We have it all the time. We come to any issue with a predetermined worldview. This can be a fight with your spouse. This can be an investment decision. This can be a view about a specific topic like migration. Whatever it is, we have a view and we start from there. And we view absolutely everything that we read, that we see about this topic through the lens of I already know what is right, what is wrong, and I'll make this bit of information fit. And of course, we constantly then can blissfully ignore data, information input that points us to the opposite of our status quo thinking. And that is, well, it can be quite costly, to be honest. And intellectually speaking, if you were to be thinking about this topic purely logically, you could catch yourself out if you dissect.
Well, I guess we like to make sense of things, and so therefore it's easier to get things to fit in the piece of the puzzle that we already know of in our mind rather than imagining a whole new picture. And it's whether iPhones are better than Android, something as simple as that, or a property that you bought, you confirm that you think that's a good location because that's where you want to live, or a business decision you make, and you make that because you, at the same time, you ignore information that may actually question what you do. Now, Google helps you, doesn't it? Because once you start reading about things or learning about things, you go into a bit of a rabbit warren that actually, in many ways, reinforces your preconceived ideas, Simon.
Yeah, and we quite often talk about the echo chamber of social media and thereabouts, and we increasingly are being fed the stuff that we like, which is absolutely dangerous. Your social media, whatever it is, whatever you think right now, your thoughts are being amplified, confirmed by the social media that you consume. So one of the easiest things that you can do to counter that trend is to read media purposefully that is a bit counter to that. So we're not saying read the extremes of the spectrum, but we're saying if you are a bit lefty, read the Australian, which is a bit righty. If you're a bit righty and read the Australian, Sydney Morning Herald, The Age. That's the type of stuff that we are saying, and it actually helps you to think out of your box, out of your comfort zone, and actually be forced to listen to the things that the people that you don't like are saying. Yeah? If you don't like Peter Dutton, listen to an interview with him. This is the kind of stuff that we are encouraging you here to do, just to purposefully broaden your horizon.
I guess the purpose of this particular episode of the Demographics Decoded podcast, Simon, is to get people to think. So normally we talk about demographics and trends shaping our future, but we actually will then act on information. So the idea, well, actually we don't always act on information. We act on our own instincts, which I guess is the purpose of our discussion today, to actually help our listeners and our viewers, our community that we've built up. And boy, we've built up a very significant community. I'm very proud of the last 6 months and how many regular followers we've got. We're just wanting to give you some insights into the way you think. Another one is anchoring bias. Now, a couple of weeks ago, Simon, I drove into town. I don't often go into the Melbourne CBD for a meeting, and I looked for a car park. Boy, that's expensive. And there was a sign up saying something like $25 an hour, and that was expensive. So I kept driving down Little Collins Street, and something said $6. So I drove into that, and boy, I paid $78 or something for an hour's car parking, because the $6 for the first 10 minutes or so. But after seeing that first sign of $25, I guess that anchored in my mind anything cheaper than that would be a good decision. It wasn't. The first number you see, especially when it comes to price, or when it comes to negotiation, it colours anything that comes afterwards.
Yes, and it's to be honest, anchoring is the sales world long has discovered anchoring and how to hack your brain through anchoring.
Yes.
You've never walked past a $1,000 couch that does not have a crossed out sign that said $5,000 on top of it. It's an easy way of, you don't know what anything costs unless you buy it frequently. You buy a couch every couple of years. Not every couple of years, every decade you buy a couch. Whereas you buy milk every week. You know the price of milk. You know the price of bread. But you do not know the price of a Persian rug, of a car. How much is a car worth? You don't know that. So you can, especially if it's a used car. So these things are a bit difficult. So then the anchoring, which can be, and the price anchor that will be thrown at you, is always thrown at you by the person with more information. The rug salesman who has the experience of selling thousands of rugs. You're buying 3 in your lifetime. So there is an easy opportunity to in your mind anchor a certain starting point. And this is why when you go on a sale, Boxing Day sales, you go like, that's fantastic. These frying pans, only $2.99. It's like, what the hell do you know what frying pans cost? What the hell do you know what good frying pans are? Can you actually compare this? It's like, yeah, it's a great deal. It was $5.99 beforehand. It's pretty much half price, so I'm pleased with this. But it's one way of making sense of this purchase, because we can't make sense of this purchase because we've got nothing to compare it with. But this comparison was just given to you just before you make the purchase decision. And so then you view it this way. So it's very, very costly, of course, to be falling into an anchoring trap the more expensive the purchase is. A car, a house, a property. So don't fall into the trap then.
Well, interestingly, if it's a commodity and they're all the same, it's much easier to put a price on. But I know at auctions, auctioneers will often say a house like this around the corner, and they'll mention the property sold for $2 million last month. And so therefore, they're not saying this particular one I'm about to auction is, but it actually sets the price. So you know that, hey, we're not going to get it for $1 million or $500,000. Agents in particular are particularly good as
exactly. They know that. And the agent would never say this house 20 years ago only cost $200,000, because you then mention a very, very low number, and that's in their brain. There's endless research out there that shows that the anchoring effect even works when you just randomly pull numbers out of a hat, when you roll the dice. It's the idea that people think certain things are worth more or worth less depending on what number they roll on a dice. We're easily influenced there.
Now, as we work through, oh, sorry, Simon, I interrupted you. Keep going.
No. It's just the idea of how crucial it is to understand that you are not immune. You think of yourself as a rational, smart person, and you probably are, but you are still very much prone to all those stock standard biases and pitfalls.
Well, another bias that I'd like to talk about is what's sometimes called awareness bias. There's lots and lots of biases, but this is one where you're not always aware of how well your investments are performing or your business is going or you have careers progressing. There's chances if you're not doing well, you might not even recognize it, Simon.
No, because it's hard to just say, yeah, it'll be okay. You don't track things. Weight is a beautiful example. It's like, how much do you weigh? Yeah, you remember what you weighed last time, but how often do you weigh yourself? So you're gonna, yeah, probably still weigh roughly the same. And then you'll get this rude shock when you weigh yourself, and all of a sudden, somehow this scale is broken and tells you you're 5-6 kilos heavier. And then you realize that probably the last 2 years, 3 years that I didn't weigh myself, my behavior shifted. And I'm now paying the consequences for it. So this is a reminder to track the things that are important to you in a frequent manner, to make sure if you're not aware of it, you probably leave them behind. And so
Well, it's also useful to have other people help you with that because sometimes it's too subjective, particularly in property. People have invested a lot of time, emotion, money in buying something, and then we actually review them at Metropole once a year. And if they've bought a property, hopefully usually not using our services, but they've already bought something and it's not working too well, they don't recognise it's not working well. They'll often say, oh, it's not costing me anything, but there's the opportunity cost. So sometimes having somebody subjectively help you do it. If you're the smartest person in your team, you're in trouble. Now, I remember reading about this bias a long time ago, and the lack of the capacity to realise how bad you are at a task is sometimes known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I read once somebody pretty rudely describing the Dunning-Kruger effect, saying dumb people are so dumb they don't even recognise they're dumb. Now that's going to insult some people, and we're not suggesting that the people here are dumb. I think what we're suggesting is that sometimes you're more biased than you think you are.
Exactly. Very, very important. But the takeaway really is measure things, get outside opinion wherever you can. And honest feedback. There's this old German saying, I'm not sure how well it translates to English, says, only a good friend can tell you that you're fat. It's the idea of you realize that the hard truth sometimes has to be mentioned by someone else because you can easily turn away from this.
Well, another bias is what's called positivity bias, where people only think positively of something. They've got a particular view and they make their investment or their business decisions in light of that, such as residential real estate's a good investment. Now, I believe that's true, but not all residential real estate is. But some people have a positivity bias about their suburb, their location or regional properties. And in fact, in the face of lack of capital growth or prolonged vacancies or inflated expensive, they still just continue to believe that their investment's going to turn a corner one day. Now, it's important to be positive. I don't know a rich pessimist, but you've also got to be just careful about how positive you are or how realistic you are, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, and again, we see that those biases, they all point us away from looking at data. They are all just us giving us, yeah, she'll be right. This has always been a good suburb. So
it's sure a shortcut, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what all those biases are. There's fast and there is slower thinking in our brain. This is Daniel Kahneman here, the research, and the idea is that we cannot operate on complex, slow thinking all the time. We take shortcuts left, right, and center just to function, just to get through this complex life of ours. You, of course, in a sense, you need to make a decision where you do not want to rely on your shortcuts, where you want to make sure that you put actual effort in. And then quite often the areas of your life where you put an effort in, a conscious effort of actually thinking through things, you end up with better outcomes.
Well, we talked about positivity bias being, if it's too positive, not to help you. But I guess it's the other as well. Some people tend to be negative, put more emphasis on the negative than the positive. Now, psychologists argue it's an evolutionary adaptation. It's better to mistake a rock for a bear than a bear for a rock, I guess, when you're in the old days there. But many of us have this bias that bad is stronger than good. They perceive threats more than opportunities, and this holds them back. So while Mother Nature has evolved our brain to trick us into making these mistakes, overestimating threats, underestimating opportunities, we've got to recognise this, Simon, so that it doesn't hold us back.
Exactly. We talk about loss aversion here, is that we are quite often, as humans,
Yes.
we are doing anything to avoid a loss, even if it's just a small loss. We hang onto it just in the hope that it turns around. It's difficult, and there is apparently this evolutionary thing that you go, one mistake can kill us. So I'd rather not make a mistake.
Yes.
But you need to understand how high the stakes are. And quite often the stakes are not that high. It's, am asking for a promotion? Should I or should I not? It's like, you're not going to be killed if you ask for it. So you might as well go for it. So this is the loss aversion tactics there. Be aware of these things, and always try to understand how much is actually at stake in any given situation. And most situations that you're in, not all that much is at stake. Your life is not at stake. These are relatively small consequences that you can iron out if they don't end up to be positive.
As you say, to keep our ancestors alive, Mother Nature helped us evolve a brain that routinely tricked our ancestors into, I guess, making three mistakes: overestimating threats, underestimating opportunities, and underestimating our resources for dealing with these threats and fulfilling these opportunities. Now, obviously, it was a great way to pass on genes to keep our society alive, but Simon, in my mind, it was a lousy way to promote a quality of life or grow wealth in business or property today.
Yeah, which is why probably we kind of look in some sort of like bizarre admiration at people who took all those risks. Because we say they are risk takers. This is a
Yeah.
thing that is kind of bizarre. It's kind of counterintuitive. It's like, hey, you're taking a risk. But quite often the risks that people have been taken, when I hear those stories, I'm like, I'm laughing at this. I'm saying this is not a risk. Zuckerberg took a risk by dropping out of college. And I'm like, boo-hoo. So if that thing had failed, he would have like re-enrolled and would have lost 2 years of his life. That's not a risk. That is a well-timed gamble with a minimum downside. So this is not a risk. We do like to tell those heroic stories to make them exciting risk takers, but quite often those risks are not nearly as risky and exciting, heroic as we make them out to be in the narrative afterwards.
Well, interesting. That follows on with the next bias I'd like to discuss with you, which is called the status quo bias, which describes our tendency to stick with what we know, Simon, rather than whether it's the best course of action.
Better the devil you know.
Yes, yes. Isn't that interesting wording?
Exactly. And again, it's the idea that the status quo, it's good, and you hear this in organizations all the time. Yes, we tried this, 28 years ago, and it didn't go well, so we better stick to the status quo. This is the idea why still there are companies and organizations with legacy systems instead of, an updated, up-to-date computer system, because you go, it's the status quo, it kind of sort of works. You know how difficult it could be afterwards and so forth. And like, rather not. And so you value the status, you overvalue the status quo. In the last,
Well, I guess every decision you make has got most of them have got an alternative, whether it's business decisions, investment decisions. And one of the alternatives, I guess, is to maintain the status quo. Just keep your money in the bank, don't invest in property, or just stick to your job, don't take an entrepreneurial risk. Psychologists show us we have a disproportionate tendency to stick to the status quo, to do nothing.
and again, if you think about cognitive shortcuts, it's pretty good. Because you go, okay, I don't need to expend all that much energy and effort into the status quo. And so it is extremely easy to get lulled into the status quo. And then you live a life of just the same. It doesn't need to be bad if you get stuck in the status quo, as long as you are happy and pleased with it. But quite often, at some point, people need to get out of the status quo, do something exciting, do something new. And that's how you improve your lot in life. The status quo never leads to a market improvement.
Well, that's why all successful investors, business people, I know entrepreneurs, have mentors, have coaches, a past of masterminds groups to help them see their blind spots and to encourage them to move forward. And I know that's one of the things you and I are going to be doing at Wealth Retreat in May this year, where we're going to be at Wealth Retreat on the Gold Coast, spending time teaching people about what their future is, but giving them a specific plan to be able to get there. They're going to come in with a whole lot of ideas and go home with firm plans for the next 5 years of their life. And I know that's also what you do when you do education to institutions, to companies, to government authorities. As part of your job at the Demographic Group, you actually encourage people to take advantage of the future.
Exactly. So what we always argue is that we show businesses, or in my presentations, I show the demographic view of that particular industry, that particular business, and we go, if you add this perspective to all of these perspectives that you already have on the business, I think you can make more informed decision about the futures, because demographics give you the, couple of developments are kind of sort of set in stone. And if you at least know that they're coming, you can adjust your product offering, your recruiting strategy, whatever it is, in a way to actually deal with the topics rather than just falling into the status quo bias, thinking that the market will operate roughly the same way. I was like, lots of things in the market will stay the same, but there are certain developments that we can guarantee you will be happening in the future, simply because the sheer force of demographics pushes the world this way. And so you better be ready for it.
Well, I'm going to give an unashamed plug that you should have Simon speaking to your organisation. So in the show notes, there's going to be a link to the Demographics Group, and have a chat with Fiona about how Simon could help your organisation. Similarly, if you're getting benefit from these chats, I'd like you to subscribe to Demographics Decoded wherever you're watching or listening to this, so you get a chance to hear Simon and my thoughts every week. And if you'd like to catch up with us face to face, of course, we'll be at Wealth Retreat on the Gold Coast. There'll be a link in the show notes, but basically go to wealthretreat.com.au, where a small group of successful business people, entrepreneurs and investors are going to meet to help shape the next 5 years of their life. The theme of Wealth Retreat is where are you going to be in April 2030. Simon, that's scary. That's 5 years' time is already going to be 2030.
Yeah, time's flying, and 5 years is nothing.
No.
To be honest, you know this. I think the older you get, the more, the faster 5 years fly past.
Goes quickly. One of the other biases is what's sometimes called survivorship bias, where people focus more on the successful things if they want to become more successful, while the truth is that failure sometimes is invisible, but you probably are going to learn more from failures. People wouldn't probably pay money to buy a book or a seminar about 5 ways I failed in business, while they're more likely to buy 10 ways to make your business grow more. But actually looking at both sides brings you perspective.
Yeah, and survivorship bias is always the story of look at top CEOs. How many of them are high school dropouts or university dropouts? And then you think, well, dropping out of university is the best move ever. It's like, maybe not that sure about it, because again, a bias is a nice shortcut. Look at the data. I would look at what is the average or median income of all high school dropouts compared to high school completions and so forth, and then you have the picture, rather than one heroic story that says this person dropped out of high school. Turns out this person had an absolute fantastic business idea, was very, very lucky, as Bill Gates always writes about the enormous amount of luck that he had and the extreme amount of backing that he had. So very much not this story of heroics that he tells. He tells about just the dumb luck that guided him along the way as well. So you must not fall into the trap of just listening to the survivors, because for each survivor there are plenty of people who didn't make it.
So true. Now that sort of follows on with the next one that we call bandwagon bias, where people do something primarily because others are doing this. This is, I guess, the tendency for us to align our beliefs and behaviours with the herd. I mean, I guess in the old days, animals and humans herded together, stuck together as a mechanism to enhance our safety. But that also means that you miss out on some of the risks. I mean, the herd's usually wrong, or it's often late, just like the herd invested in cryptocurrency or in the wrong property locations or the wrong business opportunities, Simon.
Yeah, there's a lot of just social psychology behind this. It's the fear of missing out, and it's the idea of being ostracized, and it's the idea if every one of my friends is of my circle that I look at is investing into that thing, and I'm the one moron who's missing out on that. I don't want to be that. I fear to be ostracized. Actually, it's called the bandwagon bias, because you jump on the bandwagon, but you actually you fear that you're being left out of the herd, and that you're then alone in the tundra being eaten up by the saber-toothed tiger, or whatever the perceived risk there is. It's again another challenging thing, because the FOMO is quite real. So again, do your own research, have your own opinion whether and sometimes the herd is doing great stuff, so follow the herd. But sometimes the herd is just doing a thing and you should not follow. But we also then, of course, there is this heroic story. We say the herd, where we have a certain disgust about the herd, and we say this: you're just sheep, you're sheeple, following the opinion of the masses, and we then deliberately want to act against the wisdom of the crowds. It's kind of like that. Also, is a dumb shortcut and a dumb bias. Again, actual thinking, actual data. And we're talking about deep thought, deep reflection, your own opinion, not just hating the masses for the fact that they are being the masses. That's the type of stuff that helps you making smart decisions.
Well, people often refer to Warren Buffett's great quote, "Be fearful when others are greedy and greedies when others are fearful." But I think you put a different spin on it just then, Simon, that yes, consider acting differently to the crowd, but be careful and do it based on opinion. Two more quick biases I'd like to discuss with you. One is what's called restraint bias. I guess following on from the bandwagon bias, restraint bias is the tendency for people to overestimate their ability to control impulsive behaviour. Now, will you have that extra chocolate while you're watching your weight? Will you spend that extra hour on the internet when you've really got more important things to do? Our lives are full of temptations, Simon, and some of us are better at resisting them than others of us are.
Yeah, exactly. The idea is that we think that we can restrain ourselves. We think that our future self is better at doing the thing we want than our present self. And
Yes.
you see this every January 1st, when people are convinced that by December of the year they will be lighter and fitter and whatever. It's because they just think, yeah, future me will be also athletic, will be also disciplined with their skipping breakfast, eating salads, whatever it is. It's like, is this what you're going to do? Or maybe your past behavior is a better guide of your behavior. And then you go, well, if I know that I can't constrain myself, because it's so energy intensive.
Yes, yes.
If you talk about meals, you need to make 3 healthy meal choices for 365 days a year. That is over 1,000 decisions to be made and fought through. This is extremely hard. And you think that you'll get it all right. So the question then is, how can you set up a system that allows you to be not constantly having to fight this restraint? Because it's so just labor intensive to do this that we then just give up.
Well, I see this in a slightly different way with property investors who have a long-term plan, have a long-term strategy, and then the market changes on them. The market's cyclical, and they have a few flat years. That happens every cycle. But they know real estate's a long-term investment. They've created a strategy. They've had a plan of attack, yet panic sets in when the time arrives, when there's negative news, when interest rates go up, when vacancy rates go up, and they react just like so many others do. They sell up often near the bottom of the cycle, and then the cycle turns and they kick themselves. So I guess part of this, if you're talking about with business or investments, is the concept of having mentors and having a good team of people around them. Simon, I found a lot of people in business feel isolated. They don't have a lot of people around them, and their mentors they can be virtual. You can have virtual mentors on the internet, but be careful who you listen to.
Exactly. Yeah. And to be honest, we all live very, very busy lives. Careers are busy. You want to have a life outside of your career. And when we talk about mentoring being part of some sort of mastermind group or just having a casual, intelligent conversation with people close to you, that takes time and effort. And when we are under stress, we do not take the time to actually look at our career, our life in a strategic way. And it can hold us back. Absolutely.
Now, the last bias in my mind is arguably the most damaging one because it's called bias. The fact that you think we're not even talking about you. It's an interesting conversation Michael and Simon had, but it's actually, that's not about me, that's about somebody else, because having blind spots means you're less likely to recognise how the psychological influences affect you, Simon.
Exactly. It's the meta bias out there. Yeah, but don't think that you're immune. Quite often we are not the special one. In most, you know how most distributions look like a bell curve, a couple of outliers at both extreme ends. We sometimes fall into the hero trap of thinking that we are the heroic outlier, or we think that we are the victim outlier on the other end. But quite often we're just smack bang in the middle. Just statistically speaking, it is the most likely place to end up. So more often than not, these things actually impact you, dear listener, very much. And
Yes.
it is very helpful to do self-work. Any kind of career should always have inward-looking work as well, rather than just outward-looking work. And I think you're a better business person, investor, parent, friend, if you do a bit of inner work in your life.
Well, we all think we're rational, as I started off saying, and that these biases are things that afflict other people. But I guess the message I want to get across is our brains are designed with blind spots. And one of the clever tricks they do is they confer the comforting delusion that, hey, that's okay. We're rational, we're not biased. And that's why so many Australians, so many of us are bad, not just with money, but make the same mistakes over and over again in business, in relationships, Simon, in other things. So once a week, you and I are going to get together to help people become more successful in general. We're going to be discussing demographic trends, but also we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology of success, which I think is a sub-theme of these weekly sessions, Simon.
Yeah, the goal, of course, is for those things to all fit together in some sort of way, because as we just mentioned, there is the demographics, which is more of an outward looking topic. We talked about the generations before. This is very much an inner looking thing. There's consumer behavior that comes from the inside, so to speak. And the idea is to see the full picture, view the world from as many perspectives as possible. I'm sure that everyone listening here has their own kind of literature that they read, that they refer to, which adds to their worldview. The more the merrier, I would ultimately say. And again, I truly hope that by showing the psychological inner perspective, the demographic outer perspective, we can add to your worldview a tiny, tiny bit each week.
I look forward to doing this again with you this time next week. Thanks, Simon.
Exactly. Fantastic.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kuestenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show, and if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.